Welcome to another instalment of Old Wisdom for New Times. Today I'd like to introduce you to Teresa of Avila, a Spanish nun of the 16th century. She was a reformer, a mystic, a theologian, a writer. In 1970 she was the first woman to be recognised as a doctor of the Church. This honour has only been bestowed upon 37 people in the last 2,000 years, 4 of them women. Her writings, especially her book The Interior Castle, are not only a part of the canon of Christian spiritual writing, but also an essential part of Spanish Renaissance literature. A papal legate once described Teresa as, quote, a restless wanderer, disobedient and stubborn femina, who, under the title of devotion, invented bad doctrines, moving outside of the cloister against the rules of the Council of Trent and her prelates, teaching as a master against St. Paul's orders that women should not teach. She was a mighty person in life who changed the face of Spain and of Christianity. The irony is that after death, her body suffered various indignities. Bits were removed from her body as sacred relics each time her body was exhumed and moved. And now parts of her physical body are in Rome, Lisbon, Paris, and spread across over half a dozen churches in Spain. And having been physically dismembered after death, she was then remembered through art throughout the succeeding centuries. This is the most accurate likeness we have of her physical face. It's a copy of a 16th century painting from 1576, done from life when Teresa was 61 years old. Shortly after this, in the early 17th century, Rubens painted her with a beautiful rendition of a faithful, interesting, and very eventful life. Perhaps the most dramatic example of her remembrance in art is the sculpture The Ecstasy of St. Teresa, done in the middle of the 17th century, and found in the Cornaro chapel of the Church of Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome. Here we see the saint in ecstasy, with an angel standing over her with a golden spear tipped with fire, which he would plunge repeatedly into her heart. To get the sense of this, you should really read her own descriptions of her experiences. Bernini has captured these experiences in marble, complete with Teresa's enraptured face. He has also carved into the walls of the chapel 2 galleries of male onlookers enjoying the exhibition. And then nearly 200 years later, in the early 19th century, the French painter François Gérard, part of the Romantic movement, painted Teresa again, this time seeking to express her idea of the mystical marriage with God. For those of a feminist persuasion, these images, when compared, will tell us something about not only the male gaze, but also about the evolving understandings of women and of life in successive movements of art. There's also a rich heritage of depictions of this woman in music, literature, drama and film. One story I particularly treasure came from January in 1582, the last year of her life. Teresa and some travelling companions were caught in catastrophic floods near Burgos in northern Spain. And I was reminded of this through the catastrophic floods that are occurring right now in Queensland and in New South Wales. As the cart in which they were travelling was on a road lost beneath floodwaters, as they were in great danger of being swept away, St. Teresa looked to the heavens and said, with some emotion and feeling, If this is the way you treat your friends, it's no wonder you have so many enemies. Now this story comes down to us in various forms. Another form is, if this is the way you treat your friends, it's no wonder you have so few. Various people have explored whether this is an urban myth or can be honestly attributed to the saint. One of the best explorations of it comes from Father Jeff Horton in his blog, Photations. I love the subtitle of this, because sometimes the internet is wrong. Father Horton says that it is a dubious quotation, but at least it's not a 20th century fake. What I love about this story is this feisty spirituality of this amazing woman. And it reminds me of a whole tradition right through the Bible of people whose relationship with God has been honest, engaged, and feisty. I think of Abraham arguing with God over the fate of Sodom, pleading, arguing, confronting. I think of Job wanting to protest his innocence and the injustice of what has happened to him, calling on God to meet him face to face and discuss the justice of his situation. I think of Jeremiah and the way that half a dozen times during his prophetic career he grapples with God about what has happened to him and what his vocation actually means. He says to God at one point, "You have been for me an inconsistent brook, failing me when I most need you." On another occasion he says, "O Lord, you have seduced me, and I have let myself be seduced." Within our own artistic traditions, we see some examples of this kind of very engaged, intimate, and even feisty engagement with God. One of my favourites is the Robert Duvall film, The Apostle. There's one notable scene where Sonny, the evangelist, the apostle, is talking with God. And his mother, responding to the complaints of one of the neighbours, says, "Sometimes he talks to the Lord, sometimes he yells at the Lord. Tonight he just happens to be yelling at him." There is a final biblical example of such a spirituality which is very precious to me. And that is the story of Jacob wrestling at Peniel. A story which goes on to explain that the very meaning of the word Israel, the name for the people of God, is he wrestles with God. We are often in danger of losing that feisty, honest, wrestling spirituality. One statement in the Baptist Principles and Ideals that is in the Constitution of the Baptist Union is the statement that Baptists claim the personal privilege and accept the Christian responsibility of courageously thinking God's thoughts after him under the guidance and inspiration of the Spirit of truth. In proposed amendments to those principles and ideals of the Baptist Church currently being brought to the Assembly in future months, there is a change that wants to take the word courageously out and replace it with faithfully and humbly. Is that just a small change? Or does it try to take a brave and daring approach to faith and make it something safe and docile? I long for the spirit and the wisdom of Teresa of Avila, that reforming, feisty, courageous and faithful doctor of the Church, and friend and lover of Jesus.